It is 40 years ago, but I remember it like it happened yesterday. It was just, I can close my eyes and just picture that entire day like it happened 10 minutes ago.
It was like walking into a movie set. Like it just, nothing looked real. And, you know, trees were down. It just looked like somebody picked everything up and slammed it down into the ground.
It was like being in a car wash with a 200-mile-an-hour wind, is the only way to describe it.
It's an incredible noise that the thing made. The key word is total disbelief. It doesn't happen here.
And we said, oh my God, I thought it was the end of the earth. That's basically what you think when you see all these houses totally gone.
And to this day, I cannot watch the movie Twister. For the last 6 months after that, I had nightmares, you know, from the tornado.
Fortunately, there was only, I believe, 3 people died. Why there wasn't more is beyond me.
Tornado, October 3rd, 1979.
Good evening. This is a Channel 30 news special on the devastating storm that hit Windsor and Windsor Locks Wednesday afternoon. At Bradley Field, gusts of more than 80 miles an hour were recorded, and the National Weather Service confirms the storm was indeed a tornado. 1 person was killed, more than 400 injured, millions of dollars worth of damage tonight. The National Weather Service says it was a small tornado. If it was just a small tornado, we can only imagine what a large one might have done.
But I had Jay, my oldest son, with me because I was getting a load of bluestone delivered that we had put in a pool, and we were going to put a patio around the pool of the bluestone. So we had the delivery truck there.
That day I remember not having field hockey practice. I played field hockey for the high school, and remember lugging home all my books so that I could catch up since I didn't have practice, which was a rare thing.
You know, I came home, did my homework, and then I left the house. It was probably about, I had to be to work by 3, so it was probably about 20 of 3.
When he was leaving, he went to go start his car. His car wouldn't start, so he had to take mine. And gave him a kiss goodbye, and he walked out the door. And we had a little bathroom off of our kitchen. It had a window. And I don't know why, but for some reason I went into that bathroom and I watched him drive away. And that was the last time I saw him.
I was in elementary school, so we had half days on Wednesdays. So I was not at my house at the time of the tornado. I was at my friend's house, the Spataforas, and my mom was home, and it was like a normal play date.
Yes, Al and I were discussing some public works business when his secretary stuck her head in the door and told us that the senior citizen van had overturned up in the Pequannock area. Didn't know how many people had been hurt or if anybody had been hurt. And so Al and I said, well, to each other, we'll head up there, and we hopped in my car, my town car.
I was working as the town of Windsor senior citizen bus driver. And when I went to work, it's just a normal day where I take the seniors down for lunch and then bingo. And then after bingo, after like 1:30, I would pick them all up and then basically just take them home.
I was working at Aetna in Hartford. The phone at the console where they ran everything from rang. So I picked up the phone, and it was an operator who was due to come in that evening, and he said, I won't be in. A tornado just touched down in my backyard. So I said, uh-oh, I got to get out of here.
When I was in typing class, I was supposed to have field hockey practice afterwards. And I remembered just how hot and humid it was that day. Like I remember the shirt I was wearing, and it was like sticking to me. I'm like, it's not usually like that in October.
I was on the second floor of the Windsor House restaurant. Walked downstairs and walked into the bar area. TV was on, and it was dead quiet. And I said, what's going on? And somebody said, quiet, quiet. And they were listening to the TV.
Noticed that the sky really looked horrible, And I knew 3 of the kids were getting off the bus with instruments because they played in a band. So I said, I better go up to the bus stop and get the kids because they're going to get poured on.
We were in Sage Park, 8th grade, playing soccer. Soccer practice got canceled or a game. On the bus ride out of school, up to Pequannock, I do remember it being just not dark, but definitely a stormy day.
I had invited my friend Marilyn to come over after the kids got out of school. Marilyn was ready to leave the house. It was time for her to go home, and we looked outside, and we could see that the weather was really crazy out there.
One of our police officers showed up at any rate and said I was needed in Pequannock, that there had been quite a devastation there. My first thought was that, oh, it's probably exaggerated. My job would maybe to go and try to calm everyone down.
Just a typical day. Just got off the school bus up on Meakin Drive with a bunch of kids that lived in the neighborhood, and we were just walking home. And I just remember very specifically that the clouds were this really creepy yellow color, yellow-green, and just all of us pointing up to the sky, commenting on the color and how fast the clouds were going, because they were just whipping by really, really fast.
Came off 91 onto 20, and came down 20 and started just entering where you go up the ramp to get off 20 to Pequannock Avenue, and all you-know-what let loose, and I thought it was a bomb. I thought we were hit with a bomb or something.
We would all exit the bus, and there was probably 5 of us that would get off the bus at the same stop, Oxcart Drive. The bus would continue on to Pioneer Drive. And 4 or 5 of us get off Oxcart Drive, and we're walking down next to Pequannock School, and I just happen to look up, and I see the clouds rolling this way. And it looked surreal to me. There was nothing in my mind that said, this is. But my mouth said, this is a tornado.
That's exactly what it said.
And she said, run. And as the word run left her mouth, everybody noticed the same thing. And however many there was, we all started running down Oxcart Drive. I think we got about 10 steps, and the winds hit us like this.
You look up, and the clouds are going back and forth, back and forth. We never saw that before, and they were different colors. I mean, you see like a reddish or greenish. And so, like I said, 13 years old, we think it's cool. And it's like, wow, look at this. Look at the clouds. We never saw something like that before. And we're going around the corner down Pioneer Drive. And as we're descending down towards the brook, then it started raining a little harder. And we're like, oh boy, now it's getting serious. And then it's poured, absolutely poured, and we just ran. We ran as fast as we could. Then it started hailing. Right when we got down to the bottom of the embankment, then it started hailing out and got pitch dark. Absolutely pitch dark, howling. You couldn't hear or see anything. And, the noise and all that. And then you can actually see the limbs coming down towards the street.
My mother, at one point, saying she was going to go and pick up my brothers and sisters, and that my youngest sister, Andrea, and Michelle Levesque were downstairs in the basement playing, and to just kind of keep my ear out for them. Shortly after she left, it started thundering out. And so they came upstairs and were scared, and they wanted to stay in my room. And I was like, yes, but be quiet, because I'm trying to do my homework.
We noticed something was different when the lightning and the thunder struck at the same time. So we were young, scared us a little, so we went upstairs where we felt it would be safe. And everything just started to get louder. I don't know how else to describe it.
Where it felt like it was like little pinpricks on you, like the rain hurt. And it was raining so hard you couldn't even like see, look straight ahead. It was like bouncing off the ground. We walked about 20 feet, the 4 or 5 of us that there were, and all of a sudden the rain stopped. It was like raining really hard and just went like somebody just turned off a thing, and we all looked up, and that's when he looked around and he went, tornado, and like run for the culvert. Didn't even barely get that out, and we probably ran maybe, 10, 15 feet? It was like 3 strides, and all of a sudden it was like the wind picked up really slow, it went and then it was like unbelievably strong. I remember when I was running, couldn't see anything around me, and I remember it was like sideways gray and brown, literally forming around my body, so that all I could see is about this far in front of me, and it was just gray streaks this way. I remember it like so distinctly to this day, and it was picking me up when I was running. I started to lift off the ground and start to get pushed, and so I was like trying to run, but I really couldn't because it was like blowing you all over the place.
And yeah, the sky just opened up, just downpour, 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 and everybody just sprinted, and it was like all for one for all, and so I'm just sprinting by myself down that area where the ravine is, and I look to my left, and there's a portion of a tree flying through the air, hits me. And when I go to fall down, and it hits me and knocks me down, and when I land on the ground, I was carrying my gym bag for soccer, to have my soccer stuff in. I lost grip of it, and when I lost grip of it, the gym bag just took off up into the sky.
The Wizard of Oz, with the cloud and the things blowing around in it where you can't see from me to you, is a very accurate portrayal of what you see, because what you see is a fog of debris. I was down in like a football stance trying to crawl.
So I'm down on the ground, and at that point, I'm injured. I crawled over to the wood railing and hang on for dear life. And I'm staring down at the ravine, and all the trees and everything were like blowing down like this, all in one direction. And it's just intensifying, intensifying, and intensifying. And I had no idea what's going on. And the scariest part was right at that moment, I actually felt to myself, this is only happening to me, and what is happening to me, and I was convinced I was dying.
Because all of a sudden I saw the house on the corner of Hollowbrook and Oxcart Lane on the southwest corner, just literally all the windows, like the roof went, and the windows, and the roof just. It's like it was like someone took little pieces of debris and they just started floating off.
I very specifically heard a voice behind me say, "Go into the foyer closet," which I swear is my guardian angel, because I'm 14 years old. I'm just like in shock. So I go down into the foyer closet, and I'm shut the door, and I'm in the foyer closet, and I'm standing on the shoe tree, and the coats are in there, and I've got the door closed, and I realize, what happened to my brother? Where'd he go? And I did the one thing I probably shouldn't have done, is I opened up the door. And the second I opened up the door, the closet door just flew out of my hand. And I stuck my head out and I started screaming his name, "Tom, Tom, where are you?" And I was literally in the funnel cloud, because it was so loud and so chaotic and windy, and the noise was screaming loud, and I could feel like sand and everything like hitting at my face. And then I realized, well, he's not going to hear me, and I also realized I'm starting to get sucked out of the closet from the pressure. So I pushed myself back into the closet, and I scrunched down on the floor, curled up in a ball, and I'm just holding on inside to the frame as hard as I could like this, so I wouldn't get sucked out. And I ended up passing out. Because what happened, I found out later, is when I had stuck my head out of the closet, something flew by and hit me in the back of the head, and I had a huge egg-sized bump later on the back of my head and a severe concussion and all that. I ended up passing out, which probably saved my life, because now I was just dead weight.
I told Andrea and Michelle, I go, "We got to go downstairs. I don't like that's not normal." And we never made it downstairs. Then what happened was we heard this sound, and a lot of people say it sounded like a train. I wouldn't describe it like that. It was just a very loud sound, and I just said, we better sit down right here. And we just sat down by the side of the bed and held on to each other. And then the house, basically, it sounded like it cracked. It was a very strange sound. But we just sat there, and then shortly after that, the house, the walls, the ceiling, everything started falling on top of us. And I said, you know, what is going on here? Tornado did not come into my head, but I said, you know, we're in trouble.
There's a time where I can remember flying, I don't know what other word to use, flying through the air because I could feel the debris hitting me.
And then we started moving, and that's when I said, you know, we're going to die. Something's not, you know, we're going to die. Then we started moving, and literally the wind started blowing us, and, you know, I didn't know where we were gonna, and it blew us, and while we were getting blown, you could feel like all kinds of things pelting at you, like it just felt like dirt pelting at you, and that it was a short ride, but, you know, we went, I think 80 feet is where we ended up. We were in the back corner of the raised ranch, and we ended up in the corner of the front yard. And when we were landing, it was like somebody just put us down. It's a weird feeling that all of a sudden we were just there.
I honestly prayed Hail Marys, Our Fathers, whatever it was, thinking I'm dying. And then it got pitch black. It got, the noise was incredible. And I couldn't move my head. I couldn't do anything. I was actually being pressed into that wood railing. And I just, this was it. I'm dying. This is what dying is.
So I suddenly, right next to the brook, there's railings. So it took me right to the railing, and I just held on. I held on to the railing, and, you know, you feel everything hitting you, and you don't know what's going on. You have no idea what's going on. I don't know where TJ is. I have no idea, because it's so dark, and, you know, you can't see nothing because you're closing your eyes. And then at that moment, it went by so quick that you're not even thinking. Then the wind started dying down just slightly, and I said, I got to get out of here. Like I said, I don't know if TJ took off or whatever. So there's a house right in the corner. I saw it, took my opportunity to go, and I took off towards the house. And about halfway there, I got flipped over. And I got back up, ran into the garage, and by the time that I got into their house, you know, they let me inside the house. You look out the back, and it's sunny out. You know, it really was like it was like a Wizard of Oz kind of thing. You know, you get the storm, and you walk in, it's sunny out, but you look in the backyard, there's nothing there. There's supposed to be trees and houses. You know, you don't see anything. And then you realize, really, what just happened to you.
The storm struck between 3 and by the storm. Damage extensive, expected to run into the millions of dollars. The Air National Guard helicopter fleet heavily damaged, private planes overturned, commercial businesses and homes heavily damaged, people without homes this evening.
It was too loud to hear anything. I mean, they talk about a train engine coming. and their train. It was just it was beyond my hearing level. It was just too loud to hear and too dark. I don't ever remember it being that dark in my whole life. And we suddenly felt this crushing weight on us. And I knew that I had children's heads in my arms, and I was squeezing my arms so hard, I thought it was going to crush their heads. But there was nothing I could do about it because everything was coming down on us.
It got very dark, and a 2x4 from somewhere came, and I reached for my son, and it went right over my arm, went right through the garage, and embedded itself like a torpedo into the side of the thing. So I grabbed my son, and I grabbed the delivery man and brought him into the garage against the wall and just inside the door, and I made them lay down on top of each other. And I could see my window, the bay window in the front of my house doing this, like it was like it was, you know, getting ready to blow.
I got up to Pioneer Drive, up in that area where the tornado hit. And the rain was coming down bad. It was like a thunderstorm. And it was so bad that I decided, well, nothing was said on the radio or anything, so I just said, I'm just gonna pull over, stop, and wait out the storm. And no sooner I did that, once I pulled over, I unhitched my seatbelt and checked on the seniors back, you know, and I said, we're just going to stop for a few minutes or whatever. Got back in my seat, and basically I was facing into the tornado. It was coming up the valley, and I didn't even see the funnel or anything, okay? So I'm sitting there waiting out the storm, and the next thing I know, this big gust of wind comes, and a pebble, I could see the pebble right into my eyes coming right at me. And all of a sudden, the whole front window just like got sucked away.
I don't know if I stopped to think about being stuck under there or not, but all of a sudden I realized that Marilyn had moved. She had managed to get herself out from underneath the debris somehow, which then released me and the two children that were with me. I found out later Marilyn understood she had only one child in her hands. And she knew she was missing, and she knew that the one she had was her daughter, but she didn't have the other one. And it was kind of like superhuman mom strength, this adrenaline that she kind of gave a push with her back and released herself from underneath the debris.
I'm looking at the house across the street, and it's blown away, just completely blown up. So I run out. Jerk. I mean, you know, but again, you know, you don't know what's going on. And we didn't know what this was. So I'm in the cul-de-sac in this circle, and the rain and the wind was so bad, it pushed me down into the road, and I laid right in the corner of the road next to the curb, literally forced me down, and the water is running over the top of me, and I'm watching these houses explode, just explode. And then all of a sudden, it was over.
I said at that point, I said, well, I'm going to get out and check the vehicle over. So I opened the door, and as I opened the door, it was like going 90 miles an hour on 91 down the road and opening the door. So next thing you know, I opened the door, and I could feel myself being pulled out. Well, when I did that, my mind blanked out for like 2 or 3 seconds. I must have went around the door, because I had a couple of gashes on my head, went around the door and landed 15 feet on the pavement on the ground. I get up off the pavement, and it looked like we were bombed by the Russians. That's all I could think of because of the Cold War. I turn around and I see the bus that physically went over, flipped on its side, and then went like about 15 feet, slid. So I go to check the seniors in the bus, and they're all sitting on one side. All the windows are blown out. And I look inside, and one of the seniors says to me, we're getting wet. We need umbrellas, you know. So I gave them their umbrellas, and they were sitting facing up with the umbrellas, you know, not knowing what had happened.
I pulled into the driveway across the street because our little 6-year-old was over there playing. I said, I better pick him up because he's going to get soaked. So I pulled into the driveway and I tooted the horn, and Donna came out and she put a raincoat on him and sent him out, and by the time he was coming out, his raincoat was flapping. He looked like a duck because it was a yellow raincoat. And I pulled him into the car, and he was in the back seat with Tracy, and he kept standing up and looking and saying, what is it, what is it? So I pulled him over into the front seat, and by this time, everything started rocking back and forth. The windows were breaking in the car, and I pulled him down underneath me in the seat, and I said to Tracy, stay down and hold your head. And she said, what is it, Ma? And I said, I think it's a tornado. And that was it. So when it finally was over, probably 3 minutes, I don't know, it was not long, but when it was finally over, and I looked across the street, and I saw that the house was just about all gone. I knew they were, she was up in the bedroom, but I figured, well, they must be down in the family room.
And I ran down, and I remember right down the end of the road, and the first house I came to was Greg Menard's house. And he was a postman. He wasn't home, but his wife was in, and there was a raised ranch, so it had a lower basement where she was in the raised ranch, and she was standing there, rosary beads clutched around her hands, screaming, it's the end of the world, it's the end of the world, it's the end of the world. And I reached into the foundation. I had to reach down now, because I still remember this. I never could have done this. And I picked her right up out of the foundation. She passed out, carried her in my arms up the street to the Steady's house, because Mrs. Steady was a nurse, and her kids were there, and their house was all right. They were right next door to us, and their house wasn't touched. A few people who were home that were coming out onto the street, I figured everybody was dead. I didn't know whether we were bombed. I still didn't know what this was.
When we looked out the window, when this stopped, it sounded like a train coming through. When we looked out the window, there were no houses across the street on Hollowbrook Road. Every house across the street was gone, totally gone.
Forms when you have most of the time from a thunderstorm that's rotating. So thunderstorms that spin around are called Mezzo Cyclones. And some of them, not many of them, some of them that rotation winds up connecting to the ground and you get a tornado that forms. And this is one of those storms where that happens. There was a warm front right over Windsor that afternoon. And so as the storm moved from south to north, it hit that warm front, and that's when it produced the tornado. And we can actually see that in the observations from Bradley Field. The wind before was right out of the east and east-northeast, right on that warm front. As soon as the warm front passed, the tornado hit.
We didn't have the technology that we have today to be able to see the rotation of a particular storm, like with the dual-pole Doppler radar that we have today. So it was kind of like happened right under the nose of weather forecasters, including the National Weather Service in Windsor Locks at the time, which was stationed there. And I look back at the records, and to this day, it stands out as one of the most devastating tornadoes in the United States. And a lot of times you see all these horrible tornadoes in Oklahoma or Tornado Alley, but here it happened right in the state of Connecticut.
Probably around 3:15, 3:20, my dad got a call from our friends in Windsor Locks, the Burke family, and Bob Burke's wife, actually. And he also worked with my dad in Bloomfield at the same factory at Birkin. And so at that point, she had called my dad and said, you know, I heard there was a tornado in Pequannock area in Windsor Locks. I don't know what's going on because I've got the ham radio on. I'm listening to all this chatter on air. And you might want to call your wife and see what's going on. And so we kept trying to call for a good, probably 15 minutes, at which time my dad said, you know what, get out of here, take your brother, or actually my brother was older, so we both got in the car and tried to get home to see what was going on. And we got as far as, I think it was like Pigeon Hill Road. At that point, I told my brother, hey, let's drive to Windsor Locks, let's loop around and go to Bob Burke's house.
So I said, I'm going to go for help. I said, I'll leave you here. I said, somebody will be back to help you. I went into the house. There was a house right across the street, no roof, went into the basement, and I dialed 911. And I said, I didn't know what happened. I said, the senior citizen bus needs help.
I remember opening my eyes in the middle of it because I thought it was a dream. I was trying to wake up from a nightmare. Everything started to settle when the rain started to clear and the dust started to clear, is when you could see the damage. But being 10 years old, you didn't understand what was happening. All that was left of the Spatafora's house was the lower level of a raised ranch.
When we were there, it was still raining quite, heavily, and I'm like, what's going to happen next? I don't know. And I did see that car, Mrs. Cosgrove's car there. And so my instinct, well, we need to get in that car. Just somewhere safe, I think. So we crawled over and we got in the car, and she had no idea where we came from, nor did the kids in the car.
I went over across the street and went to the front steps. Of course, the door was gone and everything, and I'm hollering, Tina, Andrea, Tina, Andrea, nobody's answering me.
And we were in the car, and then I saw my mother going across the street. And then I was like, toot the horn, tell her we're here. She's going to wonder where we are. And, she didn't hear.
And I climbed over boards, went down to the bottom of the raised ranch, and nobody was down there. And my heart just sunk. Oh, my God, Then I came out, and they were all hollering out the window of the car, they're here, they're here.
And I got up, and it was like a barren wasteland. All the houses around were just flattened. You see foundations, and wires are down, obviously, everything's down. So I made my way home, up the hill, and my mother said when she saw me, I was just, covered in debris and dirt and mud and soaked, right through to my skin.
Karen said that she saw the wall collapse on her mother and I and thought we were dead.
It was just a sea of broken trees and piles of houses where I knew people were. And there were the Andersons. Their house was just a pile of rubble, and I knew he worked at night and he was in there. So I started pawing through the debris of the houses. My hands were bleeding. I mean, it was awful. And there was no help there. We were completely isolated up there.
And then I walked over to Hollowbrook, and the devastation was, tremendous. There were pieces of houses all over the place, and so I went up and down the street to find out how people were doing. It was an eerie situation because there was an absolute silence. And I thought, where are the emergency vehicles? Doesn't anybody know what's going on here?
When it first happened, by the time I got there, people were just, police and other people were just running around. Everything was just destroyed. Trying to get state police or local police to stop, come in, decide what we're going to do next was impossible at that point in time. But I knew what we had to do. Just trying to get people to do that within the first couple of hours was very difficult. I know one of the first things that happened was, and I think you've interviewed Al Ilg, that he showed up where I was. And with his presence, we started to get some order to things. So we started to get the state police, the local police, all coordinated, or at least talking to each other.
And so we started, to figure out what to do. And we, on the first night, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, in the Pequannock Firehouse. I got a flip chart, and there were, 20 or 30 people there. And we just started brainstorming this situation that we found ourselves in. Because you have plans, the plans are on the bookshelf down at City Hall. And you read them, try to read them, you can't remember everything. But so we took it, did this brainstorming. And we came up with, I think, 2 pages of things. And people just would call out. And I can't tell you the people that were there, but it was citizens, it was people that were affected, it was firemen, police, just everybody, anybody, just come up with something that we needed to do. And we did that exercise for an hour, and then we marked them all as to short-term and long-term. And the short-term were quite obvious. We had to take care of people immediately.
I had all my people, plus I had soldiers from 2 other units that are at Hartel. So I had just under 50 people there. And I told them, I said, like, very frankly, you know and I know we're going to work tonight. I said, I can't tell you what we're going to do, but we're working.
In the Pequannock area, the same thing. The phone would ring and ring and ring, but nobody would answer. So we contacted our largest carrier at that time, the Aetna, which at that time was writing property and casualty insurance, and asked them to send an adjuster out the next morning so he could go up to the area and see how bad the damage was and how many clients of ours were damaged.
So I called my mom at work, and I remember saying to her when she answered the phone, I said, Mom, Tom and I are okay, but the house is gone. And she just said, what? I heard about a storm. What's going on? I don't understand. And I just said, Tom and I are okay, but the house is gone. And she just she dropped the phone. She was just inhaled and dropped the phone, and her boss came on and said, what's going on? I said, well, there's been a really bad storm, but we're okay, but there's no house.
An ambulance came and brought us to Pequannock Firehouse, and I was laid there with the rest of the people waiting for transportation to the hospital.
They ended up having to put a plate in my arm, so they operated on my arm, got my forearm repaired. They ended up putting stitches in my head there, and then the rest of it was because I had a crushed lower vertebrae. They ended up having to put me in traction. So for that time, in order for the vertebrae to heal, I just ended up laying around for that length of time.
As I walked away, I looked at my house, and it was just, well, it was like maybe 20% of the house was still there.
Shelley and I were sitting down, we were having our dinner, because Billy was usually late. And I heard this crunch, because we had like sliding glass doors out to a patio and into the parking lot. And I heard this crunch, and I looked out there, and it was my parents' car. And I said, what are you guys doing here? And my mother says, where's Billy? I said, he's working. And she says, no, he's not. He's in the hospital. And I said, what do you mean he's in the hospital? She says, there's been an accident, and he's not coming home. And I don't really recall what happened after that. And that's how I found out that my husband was dead.
So I said, can I borrow your bike and ride the bike from your house on Copper Road and get to Settler? And so as soon as I got to, like, in front of the Ramada Inn, that's when I kind of stopped pedaling a little bit and stopped, and it was weird because Dale Drug was like just about gone, and the hardware store was just about gone, looking off to the side. And before, you couldn't see that because of all the trees. And I'm looking at it, and then the plane was flipped upside down. And you just kind of look at the total devastation. And at that point, I was like, well, there's power wires over the road. And I'm like, well, the hell with it, I'm just going. You know, so I just kept riding the bike and kept riding it until I got to Meakin, and at that point I'm like traveling through debris trying to get through different things. So I continued down Pioneer, went down Settler, at which time I saw cars flipped over, both sides, trees, mattresses in the trees. But I got in front of my house and I'm looking at the second floor of the house just teetering inside the foundation. And so I'm looking around and I'm seeing some of our stuff, but all the trees, which were very mature pines on the north side of the house, were completely gone, all snapped off. I saw my dad's station wagon up against the house next door on the northern side. And at that point I was like, you know, you call out Mom, but really, you know, that seemed more of an impulse at that point, like a natural impulse where you start looking around. And at that point, I was like probably in shock. I saw Miss Schlehecka, and she lived across from us, but more northern, next to the Alfieris. And I said, have you seen my mom? And she's like, oh, your mom left. I said, she did. Because when I left the house, she was sick. And she was upstairs in bed. So she just wasn't feeling good that day. I said, that's odd because I left her at about 2:30 and she's like, no, I saw her leave. And so I was like, okay. So I figured everything's all set. And so I walked back up, got on the bike and pedaled all the way back to Windsor Locks. And at that point, you know, we didn't have cell phones. So I called my dad and I said, somebody said that, you know, she drove away. And then my dad reminded me, well, that's not possible because you had her car.
We needed to be concerned about who was missing because we had this large area of homes, many of them destroyed. And where were these people?
When I was out looking at some of the houses and trying to determine, there were teams doing it, but I went out and there was a house that was picked up and moved onto the pool. And as we were walking around that and kind of poking in the pool, this doll pops up out of the pool, which is, you know, your first thought that this is a child. It was a doll.
Yeah, it was devastating. It was hard to see when I first went into Pequannock with that backhoe. I came down West Street and wow, what a mess. And so I went up and got my backhoe and drove into Pequannock and started pushing stuff out of the roads and doing what I could to clean up, to open the roads up. And spent till dark doing that.
But that evening, I contacted a number of people, and they said, yes, we'll take you through now. And it was after dark. And we drove into Windsor on Route 75, and we drove into the neighborhoods that have been devastated, the residential neighborhoods. And I was really shocked by what I saw. It was much worse than anything I had ever seen on TV about a tornado. The whole neighborhood smelled like a lumber mill. You could smell the wood having been ripped open.
Al and I were talking about what we were going to do, how we were going to organize, and a Cadillac or a limousine showed up. And sure enough, inside was Governor Grasso and Lieutenant Governor Bill O'Neill. But anyway, she took me up to Windsor Locks safety complex and already had some of the state commissioners there and what have you. And essentially, we reviewed what might be able to be done by the state.
And we were getting calls from around the country asking about family. And so we set that up with the library in the center of town. And a bunch of people, librarians and citizens just came in and helped out. And we had a pretty good handle on where everybody was. So when somebody called, we could say, no, they're safe and they're at a hotel, etc.
And so from there was basically just a waiting game, you know, for about a day and a half. And I went to work the next day, and instead of going to school, and so kind of hung out with Dad, because it was kind of like a, you know, where else are we going to be? You know, you don't have a home.
We were, for example, the first 24 hours, nobody went to sleep. We were up 24 hours and worked the following day. We were working the National Guard and doing their various support activities. We were working probably 20 hours a day. I was quite worried about the people being overcome by lack of sleep. I had people that I actually had to go out and pull off of bulldozers because they had been on them 16 and 18 hours.
From the way I understand it, from what I was told, they saw that the bad weather was coming in. They were paving a parking lot in Windsor, and they took shelter in the company truck. Now, there was one gentleman who went onto the driver's side. My husband was seated in the middle, and then there was another gentleman on the right side, the passenger. From what I understand, Bill had his friends put their heads down in his lap, and then he went like this. Unfortunately, he was the one who got caught in the crossfire of the tornado, and he died immediately. There was no suffering, thank God. I was not formally informed that my husband was dead. Mrs. Dufford came over my house to see how I was doing, and she stayed for a while. My parents were still there. And after I put my daughter to bed, we were watching the TV, and that's when his name came across the screen. And that's when it really hit me that he was not coming home.
My dad's boss, it was, yeah, I think either the next day or the day after or something, he called me into his office and said, you know, at that time I didn't know that my dad had left because I was down testing parts and stuff. And he's like, you know, sit down for a minute. I want to talk to you. He says, you know, times like this make you a richer, smarter person, hopefully. You can go two ways. You can either let it affect you and affect your family and affect your personal life, or you can wrap your arms around it, decipher it, don't read too far into it, make your adjustments, and move forward and help your family. So I was kind of caught off guard with all the conversation because I didn't know what he was talking about, you know, at that point, until, you know, my dad called on the shop phone and said, hey, you need to come home, come over to the Burke's house. And at that point, that's when he told me that my mom had passed.
I remember St. Joseph's Church was packed and people were standing all over the steps and everywhere else for, you know, for her services. The family was incredibly brave and gracious for all that was done.
People couldn't call us to let us know that they had claims, so we had to try to find them. So we proceeded up River Street, and the first house we came to there, he was actually standing in his cellar, and there's nothing at all in the building. No furnace, no nothing. It was just the, and he had, I'll never forget, he had a winter shirt on. It was hot. God, it was hot, October 4th, this now we're talking about. And had a winter shirt on, and he was pulling nails out of a 2x4. And I said, John, what are you doing? He said, well, I got to save this lumber. I got to rebuild this house. And I said, you don't need to do that. The insurance adjuster's here, and we're going to make you whole. We're going to put you back in the same situation you were before. And the adjuster wrote him a check on the spot. This is 1979 for $75,000 as a down payment to get going, to start working on rebuilding his house. And he, I don't forget it, he took the check and he put it in his pocket, in his shirt pocket. We proceeded on and to all the other homes. The next morning I came back. I went up every day for 30 days checking on the clients. And his wife was there. And I said to her, did John give you the check that I gave him? She said, no. I said, I gave him a check for $75,000. And she said, well, he slept in his car last night. Let me go look in the car and see if the shirt's there. And the shirt was there and the check was there. He never remembered I gave it to him. And because there's so many people were in shock.
But the long-term issues were interesting as well. Out of that came the suggestion that we publish a daily bulletin. And we did. A week later, there was something called the Windsor Phoenix. And that was a newspaper that was delivered to everybody. Ran off hundreds of copies each day. And because one of the things that came up in the session on the night, Wednesday night, was we were worried about rumors, and nobody knew, the extent of the damage. So there was a lot to learn, and as we found out information, we put it out.
The next day they let us in, and it was complete shock. Like, I was seeing it all for the first time, and it was total devastation. My mom grew up in World War II Germany, and she lived right outside of Nuremberg, and she remembers all the bombings and everything, and she said it brought her back to her childhood, that it looked like a bomb went off.
We would see folks that came back, and it was awfully hard talking to them about it, and most everybody was pretty intent on finding what they could of their belongings, and I just, at that time, I determined that I really shouldn't get into the areas of the houses to find their stuff, because it really was another situation that I felt strange at doing. I just didn't, I thought I ought to stay in the roads. And
debris everywhere, like everything that had been in their houses was strewn all over the place. And people were literally just wandering around trying to help each other, trying to figure out what was there, what wasn't there. And, a lot of people really upset. There were people sitting in front of their houses crying. And I remember walking through and just how devastating it was. I remember I came home and I was really upset. So, yeah, it was.
Ella Grasso was governor at that time, and she was fabulous. She got everybody help. She really cared, and I don't think another governor would do as much as Ella Grasso did.
Ella Grasso was working with all assets in Washington, FEMA and the normal support system, but also with HUD. And one of the things she did with HUD was get a hold of, by browbeating them to death, got a hold of 65 trailers and had them brought from Pennsylvania to Connecticut. And those people that lost all their homes, they had a trailer available until they were really on their feet. So she was fully aware of our capability and fully aware of the importance of having a guard and using their assets.
When I went to the hospital, they casted my leg, and then we came back eventually to the firehouse. And, you know, I was laying on a couch, I think it was, a cot or whatever. And I actually started to go into shock. And my mother is a nurse, so she knew, she could tell that something was wrong, and she was very upset and was yelling for help because, you know, they were just at the hospital, they didn't check her, and Ella Grasso, the governor at the time, was there in the firehouse. And she came over to my mother and you know, what's wrong? What can I do for you?
She said, Dr. So-and-so, because I guess they brought the doctor from the state there. Dr. So-and-so, come over here. And, you know, immediately they started, you know.
And then they assigned when we were at the Gustafson's house that night, they assigned a nurse to stay with me the entire night. And I just remember her taking my blood pressure like every 5 seconds, you know, constantly, you know, monitoring me. So, you know, we're forever grateful to Mrs. Grasso.
But I had missed a lot of school for obvious reasons, in the sense that, you know, you don't have a home, you're living out of town, you know, we're sharing a car. Then the vice principal called my dad up and said, you know, Tom has missed a lot of school. He's in danger of not graduating this year, because it was my senior year. And so my dad instantly said, really? Okay, I'll take care of this. Ella called the vice principal, and then next thing you know, the vice principal called my dad back and said, I apologize, and I'm really sorry, and that was not professional of me or compassionate of me.
Each morning I would go to Windsor Locks. She had set up what she called a command center there. Essentially, she'd have either everyone or almost every commissioner, state commissioner, there at a big table. And I would have my list. Al Ilg and I would have prepared a list the day before, and she'd say, now, does Windsor need anything? And I'd start reading my list. And every once in a while, Ella Grasso would turn to a commissioner and say, how about some more trailers for Windsor? And the commissioner, you could see him start to say, oh, wait, we don't have, and she'd just kind of scowl and say, well, we can get it, we can get it. And we got an amazing response, really. People were great, and the state government was great.
On this particular briefing, she was sitting at a large table with all of her commissioners. She finished with them, and she looked up at the officials lining the room. The mayor of the town was there, the selectmen, all standing around. And she said, is there anything else? Does anybody else have anything to say? And I raised my hand, and I said, Governor, they need porta potties in the Pequannock section. And she said, oh my God, they don't have porta potties up there? Oh, I would have thought they did. And she looked up at her commissioners and she said, well, who can take care of that? I will, Governor, I will, Governor, I will, Governor. 5 commissioners. I'll take care of it, I'll take care of it. She just pointed to one and she said, okay, you can do it. And I thought, I'd spent the previous day getting the runaround. I can imagine what an average citizen would have gotten. And I was identified as a state senator. And the amusing thing about that, if there was anything amusing in this time of the tornado, it was a lesson to me of the importance of having the chief executive on the spot in a crisis.
People have lost their homes. Severe injury and much heartache.
It was weird. So you're kind of starting all over, you know? And with the trailers, it allowed us to basically get back to where we sit down at dinner time and we can talk things out.
That the town people and the town itself all pitched in. When I say that the Jaycees were involved, I'm sure the Lions were involved, I'm sure Kiwanis was involved, I know the churches were involved. Everybody just, whatever they could do, they did. And that helped out tremendously, because it wasn't just the insurance companies, it wasn't just the Jaycee, it was a whole town coming together. You could never, I don't think many towns could do that. I really don't. We're very fortunate here.
Set up the headquarters for the first week in the firehouse. And then later on, we kept using the firehouse. And there was a gal, it was John Silliman's wife, Debbie Silliman. And she organized the kitchen. And that turned out to be one of the most important things of all for all the workers. And she just did a fantastic job.
The Red Cross, the Salvation Army, and also the Mennonites. We just think they are fabulous, and we support them since then because they were wonderful to us. They were absolutely wonderful to us. I don't know how we could have done it.
And then you had a lot of people coming up, hey, do you need some help with, people would literally just be walking down with their chainsaws.
There was volunteers, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot, and they would wander down and they'd be like, hey, it's like, I don't have anywhere to work right now. Do you want me to help? I can chop up some wood for you. And people literally just wander around to help.
And we had thousands of people came every weekend and during the week to get stuff out of the ravine.
We used to have conga lines.
Yeah.
They would pass, 6 inches the person next to you, and then they'd pass it. The lines would be 100 people long.
And I'm thinking to myself, I have 2 live, healthy children, 1 in each hand. I don't care what happened in my house. I'm the luckiest person in the world. We all walked away from this.
It was afterwards is when the emotions came. When the people, you give them the checks, they start crying. You start crying, and everybody be crying. These people I knew, these people were my friends, number one. They were clients second. And I knew their kids. My kids played baseball with their kids. It was a family thing. It wasn't a business thing. I was just there to give them money to get back where they were. But my main reason was there is to see them, hold their hands,
So, as I look back, it, in many ways, well, it was a very hard thing at first. And people had to really struggle, and we in the church had to struggle, but in the long run, there was so much that positive because of the low-cost small business loans that people were able to get. They were able to build houses that were bigger, more comfortable, better. The church, its spirit was fantastic. We felt God was really supporting and moving us. And we came out with a structure that was so much better suited to our ministry for God and for the community.
People felt guilty who lived in the neighborhood but their house wasn't like destroyed, or it was, you could be 200 yards away up on Stagecoach, and you didn't even have any extra leaves in your yard.
I feel sad, but I feel happy. I feel happy that he's in a better place. He's looking down on us and smiling. But it's also sad that she doesn't have her dad with her to see his grandchildren.
It was hard seeing, the kids, my friends, having both of their parents there, and just wondering why. Why did it have to happen to us or to me, and not just getting it? So it was harder as I started getting older.
I spent many months in counseling, and actually many years in counseling, trying to just get over the fear of the thunderstorms. I had fear of thunderstorms up until I was about 36. So it took me a long time, and then I just actually moved past the hospital trauma within the past year. So it's been in stages.
After 40 years, well, almost 40 years, you know, it's hard, and it never goes away.
We actually talk about it more now than we did back then. Like when we get together at a reunion or something like that, you know, we'll reminisce sometimes about every October 3rd we send an email out to each other, you know. Yeah.
Life's precious, and you know, you just never know moment to moment, and you just got to be grateful for every moment, because I mean, who would have thought a tornado? You know, I just got off the school bus, and the next thing you know, it was just, it happened, and very grateful to have survived that, and you just have to remember that.
That Christmas, my godmother, my Aunt Ann, she was a big photographer, and she put together an album for me with with baby pictures and, you know, everything up to that point, because I didn't have anything, you know. And that kind of stuff, if you're talking about material things, like even today, I'm a scrapbooker, and documenting life's happenings is very important to me, because you know that those things can be gone in a heartbeat. But the pictures, you know, the stories, that's what you want to hold on to.
You never forget the moment of what happened that day, that minute and a half, 2 minutes, or whatever it was. That amazing when you see storms come in now, you think about it all the time. I mean, when you look up, now you look up and you see the clouds and everything else, you kind of have a sense, you know, I've seen this before, this could get dangerous. And
it got labeled the Windsor Locks Tornado. If you look at the path from where it started on Darwin Drive, across Pequannock School, up Hollowbrook, then it went across Route 75. I don't recall, you know, 30 or 40 houses or businesses that were damaged in Windsor Locks. Most of it, the severe damage, was in Windsor. So every time you opened up the paper, Windsor Locks Tornado.
You know, there's two
we
gentlemen who died.
absolutely want to claim that as our tornado. It was not the tornado of Windsor Locks. It was the tornado of Pequannock, Connecticut. Not Windsor, but Pequannock, Connecticut.
Very specifically.